Welcome to the third of 6 lectures on the visual elements. We've talked about this in class and how important it is that you have an understanding of the elements and the principles of design. If we are going to look at art and analyze art, you need to know the vocabulary. As I go through these lectures, I'm really isolating each of these elements. But when we get to the level of the analysis, which we're beginning to do in class, they all come together and you begin to see how all of those elements play an important part in the unity and in the conveying of the message that the artist is trying to send. Nothing is more frightening to an artist than standing in front of a blank canvas. Just as we come into our lives, we're generally a blank canvas. But what appears on that canvas depends on what the artist is trying to convey. It isn't really too much of a stretch to understand that without light, we wouldn't be able to see shape, form, mass. We wouldn't be able to see how things relate to each other. I'm sure you've all been in a completely black room and you can't make anything out. How disorienting that is, and sometimes very frightening. So it's with light that we begin to understand the material world. And without light, it's a little difficult. Now, when we talk about art and talk about light, you can divide it into two parts. The actual light, sunlight, electric light. I refer to that as natural or man-made. But now, two-dimensional artists have to depend on their ability to create that illusion, that interpretation of how light would look in reality when it is conveyed on the canvas. Now, actual light, this is something that photographers obviously would use, and sculptors is very much a part of their consideration when they're making their art as well. Because with actual light, there is naturally shadows. So prior to Stieglitz taking this picture of the steerage, artists would, or photographers I should say, photographers would pose the subjects. No one had ever done this, just straight photography, no manipulation, just capturing the moment. In this particular moment, he was making a transatlantic crossing in first class and happened to look over the railing and see the men, the women, and the children not having such a great crossing. He had one shot left on his film. They were actually glass plates, and he only had one glass plate left. He ran to his room and got it and took this picture. So not only does it document how other people, what it was like for people who weren't wealthy to make these crossings, so it's a document, but it is also the first works of artistic modernism. And by that, what I mean is now with the use of the camera, with the use of photographs, artists could begin to conceive of looking at art in a cropped notion. They could crop an image. Before 1907, they felt that they had to create an entire composition within the shape of the canvas, the length of the wall, whatever that might be. But now they understood that they could crop an image and that it would still work. This is what photography did, and this is what started a whole new modernist approach to painting. All right, how do artists create light or create that implied light, that interpretation of light? There's 3 ways: shading, modeling. They can use value, the light to the dark. And that chiaroscuro is Italian for light and dark. And now we're looking at a painting by Artemisia Gentileschi about Judith and the beheading of Holofernes, a biblical story, very well known. And she really nails it with the shading, the modeling, the value, and the chiaroscuro. The shading creates a sort of modeling, a sort of giving the arms and the bodies and the hands, even the curtain and the table, gives them all form, gives them all mass, gives them all volume. Value, the same thing, the light to the dark. And there's that chiaroscuro that I was so excited about. This, to me, is this strong contrast of that light and shadow that really creates a very dramatic moment, which, of course, this is. This is the moment that Judith and her maidservant have lopped off the head of Holofernes. Well, how did our characters get to this point? Well, as it seems, the Assyrians, led by Holofernes, were bearing down on Judith's hometown. A very young widow, she went to the gates of the city and said, "Look, Holofernes, I know it's been tough, and we really don't want you to come and burn down our village and take all of our possessions. So I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You can have me. You can have me if you spare my city." So he's thinking, it's been a long campaign. Tell you what, you come to my tent tonight. So Judith says, "Okay, that sounds like a good idea." She goes back to her house, and she and her maidservant cook up a plan that after Judith got Holofernes drunk and he passed out, she would lop off his head, thereby stopping the army from taking over the city. So Judith goes to his tent that night, and they talk and talk, and they drink and they drink, and she's able to get Holofernes drunk, which was her plan. He passes out. She goes behind the tent, calls to her maidservant, who comes in with the sword that you see in Judith's hand, and together they chop off his head. The moment we see here is Judith has stepped back now into the shadows of the tent. There's a very bright light off to one side, and Judith is using her hand to shield her eye from that bright light so she can see what's going on. The maidservant is looking at Judith for the signal that everything is okay. They're waiting for just that moment to make sure that the guards aren't going to rush into the tent. What Gentileschi has captured here is that very, very quick moment, but a very important moment. We see in this narrative what she did and what is going to happen next. The head of Holofernes is on the ground. The maidservant is holding it. Judith is taking a moment to make sure that no one is going to follow them. Now we can predict what happens next. The coast is clear. Judith and the maidservant go back to the town. The next morning, the generals go to look for Holofernes. They see he has been beheaded. They go to the town. They don't know who did it. They're going to get their revenge. And when Judith comes to the gate with the head in a basket, they realize that they have met a formidable foe. So they turn and ran. Judith, our heroine, has saved the day. So the two aspects of light we talked about are the actual light and the illusionistic light. A lot of people get really confused with that. The illusionistic then is just how the artist is going to create that illusion that this event that they have depicted, as we saw with Judith and beheading Holofernes, using those tools, the modeling, the chiaroscuro, the use of light and dark, help us to understand that these were real people with real form. So it's not actual, it is use of an illusion. So back to where we started. All of art starts with a blank canvas, much like our lives. And I think we get to places in our lives that we get a fresh start. And so without light, without some reflection, without using our eyes, using our senses, we would also be lost in our worlds.